At 09:17 on January 22nd, 1943, Second Lieutenant John George aimed a rifle his own commanders called a joke, a civilian hunting toy, mail-order trash unfit for war, a Winchester Model 70. Through its cheap scope, he tracked a shadow in the canopy 240 yards out one of 11 Japanese snipers who'd killed 14 Americans in 72 hours. The 132nd Infantry was bleeding out. Henderson Field, 2 miles east, hung in the balance. The entire Pacific campaign teetered on the edge. Command had ordered George to ditch his Winchester Model 70 for a real weapon. He refused. Now crouched in a shattered bunker west of Point Cruz, Guadalcanal, mud-soaked and alone, he squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. A body tumbled through vines. Then mortars screamed down raining shrapnel on his position, turning his impossible gamble into a 4-day hunt where one man with a mocked rifle faced an elite enemy in jungle that swallowed soldiers whole, and the cost of failure was measured in American lives stacking up like cordwood. Could a weapon everyone dismissed as worthless become the only hope standing between survival and slaughter? Guadalcanal's western groves weren't just jungle. They were a killing floor wrapped in green hell. Banyan roots twisted like razor wire. Coconut palms wept rot. Humidity didn't cling, it strangled, turning every uniform into a wet shroud. December 1942. The Marines pulled out. They left behind the 132nd Infantry Regiment, Illinois National Guard farm boys and factory workers who'd never seen combat like this. Exhausted, fever-ridden, malaria burning through them faster than Japanese bullets. The enemy knew it. Retreating from Henderson Field, they dug into Point Cruz with surgical precision. They brought scoped Arisaka Type 97 rifles. They brought discipline forged in years of jungle warfare. They brought death so invisible it felt like God himself had turned against the Americans. 14 men died in 72 hours. Not in firefights, not storming positions, just gone. A patrol would enter the tree line at dawn. By noon, bodies slumped against trunks, neat holes through skulls, through hearts. No muzzle flash, no warning crack. Just the wet sound of a man choking on his own blood, then silence. The 132nd tried everything. Garands hammered the canopy 8-round clips emptied into leaves that swallowed bullets like they were nothing. Officers screamed for suppressive fire. Hundreds of rounds tore through foliage, hit nothing, killed no one. The Japanese were ghosts. 40 feet up, 50-60, perfectly camouflaged, perfectly patient. When they fired, Americans died every single time. Fear spread like the malaria. Men refused patrol duty, threatened desertion. The groves became a forbidden zone inside American lines, a tumor growing in the regiment's gut, paralyzing movement, destroying will. And the stakes, catastrophic. Henderson Field sat 2 miles east, the airstrip that controlled the entire Solomon Islands. If the 132nd broke, if fear won, Japanese forces would sense it. Counterattack, retake the field. Every supply convoy crossing the Pacific would be exposed. Months of brutal fighting, thousands dead on both sides, would collapse into nothing. The entire Pacific theater could fracture. Then John George walked into the commander's tent. 24 years old, soft-spoken. Before the war, he'd been nobody special, just an Illinois kid who loved shooting. State champion with a rifle, precision over power, patience over speed. He'd brought his personal Winchester Model 70 to war, a bolt-action hunting rifle with a Lyman Alaskan II. Bosch's Fate ink scope he'd ordered from a Sears catalog. It survived the sea voyage in a wooden crate with his socks and letters from home. His officers took one look and laughed. "That's a toy, Lieutenant, a deer rifle. You're fighting the Japanese Imperial Army, not whitetail in the woods back home." They ordered him to turn it in. Take a Garand like everyone else. Fight like a real soldier. George refused. He understood something the career officers didn't. Something simple, brutal. When your enemy owns the battlefield, owns the high ground, owns invisibility itself, Volume of fire means nothing. You can't kill what you can't see. But one bullet perfectly placed ends the threat forever. The desperate commander, watching his regiment bleed out from invisible wounds, gave George a mission born of complete desperation. Go into the groves, find the Japanese snipers, kill them, alone, because sending squads just meant more corpses. George didn't hesitate, didn't ask for backup, didn't question the odds. He accepted because 14 men were already dead, because more would die tomorrow, because someone had to walk into that green hell and make it stop. January 22nd, 1943. Dawn. George entered the western jungle, Winchester across his back, 60 hand-loaded rounds, no spotter, no radio, no plan except to hunt 11 elite enemy marksmen who'd already proven they were better than anything America had thrown at them. The grove swallowed him whole. The first kill should have been easy. It wasn't. George spotted movement at 240 yards, subtle, deliberate, wrong for natural jungle rhythm. A silhouette shifted against morning light filtering through the banyan canopy. He dropped prone behind the bunker's crumbling concrete. Slowed his breathing, aligned the crosshairs. Squeezed. The Winchester cracked. The figure jerked, dropped through branches in a cascade of snapping wood. George had exactly 3 seconds to feel victorious. Then the jungle tried to kill him. A second sniper 60 yards north, positioned in perfect overwatch, opened fire. Bullets hammered the concrete lip-spraying rock fragments that sliced George's cheek. He rolled hard, scrambling through ankle-deep mud as 6.5mm rounds chased him like angry hornets. Dove headfirst into a shell crater filled with black water. The cold shocked his system. The smell, rot, and death nearly made him gag. He surfaced slowly, just eyes above the waterline, scanning. The second sniper made his mistake, leaned out searching for the kill. George didn't think, didn't calculate, just fired. The man vanished backward into green. 2 down, 9 to go. Then the mortars arrived, 11 minutes after his second shot, timed perfectly coordinated by radio. Japanese shells screamed from the sky. The first explosion shattered a palm trunk 30 yards out, the second closer. The third walked directly toward him. George low-crawled through mud as the world disintegrated into flying steel and splintered wood. Each blast closer than the last. Shrapnel zinged overhead. 1 piece. 2. A third carved a line across his pack. He abandoned the position as the fourth shell obliterated where he'd been. By mid-morning, the sky opened. Not rain, a biblical deluge that turned the jungle into a drowning pool. Visibility collapsed to 30 yards. George's scope fogged completely. He wiped it with shaking hands, smearing more than clearing. Through a brief window of clarity, a third target. 290 yards up, a coconut palm. George compensated for wind, for rain, for the fact he could barely see. Aimed 2 feet high, 18 inches left based on palm frond movement. Fired. Complete miss. The bullet clipped bark 3 feet wide. The sniper disappeared like smoke. 90 seconds later, a Type 92 heavy machine gun found him. Belt-fed 7.7mm rounds sawed through the tree line in long, murderous bursts. George pressed his face into filth as bullets shredded vegetation directly overhead. Leaves and bark rained down. He crawled 40 yards on his elbows, the Winchester dragging through muck, moving sideways to the gun's arc. His arms burned. His lungs burned. Everything burned. Afternoon brought something worse than bullets. Psychology. A Japanese helmet sat perched on a branch at 180 yards. Perfect. Obvious. Screaming. "Shoot me!" George stared at it. Every instinct said fire. Prove you're still in the fight. Hit something. He waited instead. 11 minutes of absolute stillness while mosquitoes feasted on his exposed skin. His heart hammered so hard he thought the enemy could hear it. Sweat mixed with rain stinging his eyes. Then barely visible movement 91 feet up a nearby palm. The real sniper adjusted position, cramped muscles betraying him for just 1 second. George fired twice, working the bolt fast. The hidden man crashed through Fran's arms, windmilling. But the Japanese weren't stupid. They were adapting. Voices multiplied through the trees, 6 distinct voices calling positions in Japanese. Maybe more beyond hearing. Infantry, not snipers, converging in coordinated sweeps. They'd identified the threat. Now they were coming to kill it. George had maybe 2 minutes before they boxed him in. He ran, abandoned stealth completely, sprinted through ferns as shouts erupted behind him. Arisaka Type 99s cracked sharp, angry sounds. Rounds snapped past his head with supersonic cracks that meant near misses measured in inches. He zigzagged on pure instinct, using boulders, fallen logs, anything for momentary cover. Dove into another water-filled crater just as 3 soldiers burst into view where he'd been. Submerged completely. Held his breath until his lungs screamed, until black spots danced in his vision, until he was sure he'd drown before the enemy left. Boots splashed directly overhead, voices urgent, close enough to touch. George stayed under, rifle clutched to his chest, praying the muddy water hit him. The boots moved on. The voices faded east. He surfaced, gasping vision swimming, oxygen-starved, shaking. 4 confirmed kills. 7 Japanese snipers still out there, and now they knew. Knew someone was hunting them. Knew their doctrine was being dismantled. Knew they were dying. The duel had escalated beyond sniping. This was chess played with lives, and every move invited retaliation. George exploited their coordination, waited for radio checks when operators were distracted, found gaps in their sweep patterns, turned their discipline into predictable rhythm he could counter. But the cost kept rising. By late afternoon, George's hands trembled uncontrollably. The Winchester's barrel burned too hot to touch. Mud caked every surface. His body screamed for rest. The jungle gave him none. 7 elite marksmen remained. 7 trained killers who would slaughter more Americans tomorrow unless he stopped them today. He pressed deeper into enemy-held groves, alone, hunted by the same men he was hunting. The line between predator and prey had blurred into nothing, and somewhere in the green hell ahead, 7 rifles were aiming at shadows, waiting for him to make one fatal mistake. What happens when the hunter realizes he's been the prey all along? George stopped running, started thinking. The Japanese weren't just good, they were trained, disciplined, lethal. Rushing would get him killed. So he slowed down, turned his brain into a weapon sharper than any rifle. From a water-filled crater reeking of decay, he glassed the canopy like he was reading a book. Left to right, top to bottom, methodical, hunting for the one thing that didn't belong, branches bending against wind shadows, moving wrong silhouettes, breaking the natural chaos. At 190 yards, a branch twitched, tiny, almost invisible, bait or threat. George studied the surrounding trees, calculated angles, analyzed sight lines. There, 70 yards behind the obvious movement, a darker shape, lower, waiting. George made his choice, fired deliberately at the decoy branch, missed on purpose just badly enough to look like fatigue or poor aim. The hidden spotter bought it, shifted for a better angle to capitalize on George's mistake. Fatal error. George's second shot dropped him before his brain registered the trap. The Winchesters mocked 2.5x linemen, scoped the inadequate optic officers had ridiculed, became George's killing edge. Not because of magnification, because he'd fired 10,000 rounds through this rifle in competition. Knew every quirk, every limitation, knew exactly where bullets landed at every distance he'd ever practiced. When everyone else was guessing, George knew. Mud became his paradox. It clogged the bolt, forced him to manually clear debris between shots, losing precious seconds in firefights. But it also absorbed sound-erased tracks, turned him into a ghost. George used water-filled craters like medieval castles, submerging when Japanese patrols passed, rifle held above the surface, barely breathing. The enemy worked in pairs. Always. Spotter and shooter textbook doctrine from their specialized schools. George inverted it. Killed the spotters first. At 240 yards, he found a pair working a bamboo grove. The spotter glassed open ground with quality optics. His partner scanned vertical threats. Two professionals covering every angle. George settled into prone, controlled his breathing like he was back on the competition range, inhaled, exhaled, found that natural pause between breaths where the body goes absolutely still. Between heartbeats, he squeezed. The spotter dropped. His shooter partner spun, confused, fired 3 panicked shots at nothing. George cycled the bolt, fired again. 2 dead in 8 seconds. Ammunition became mathematics of survival. 60 rounds total, 27 gone, 33 remaining for 7 confirmed targets plus unknown infantry escorts. Every bullet had to count. Every shot had to kill. George tracked each round obsessively loose in his pack, loaded in the chamber, fired into green hell. The numbers haunted him: 33, 32, 31. Each pull of the trigger brought him closer to empty, closer to fighting elite marksmen with nothing but his knife. The wind shifted throughout the day. Morning calm became afternoon chaos, 15-knot gusts from the northeast swirling through the groves unpredictably. No ballistic tables could account for this. No manual could teach it. George compensated by pure feel. Palm fronds bending left, aim right. Bamboo shivering, wait for the lull. 50 competitions had taught him to read wind like other men read words. Sound became intelligence. The Type 99. Arisaka cracked sharp higher pitch than the Winchester's deep bark. George weaponized this difference. Fire from one position. Relocate 30 yards. Listen. If return fire came toward the original spot, he'd marked their location. If it came toward his new position, they'd tracked him. Adjust. Adapt. Survive. Facing paired opponents in a mahogany stand, George employed deception that would have gotten him court-martialed in conventional warfare. Scraped bark with his boot, obvious artificial noise. Drew immediate fire from the alert pair, marked their muzzle flashes precisely, then circled wide through mud and rain, approaching from their rear quarter where mutual overwatch meant nothing. 2 shots, both down before they realized the first sound was bait. Late afternoon brought his hardest tactical problem. 3 Japanese snipers in perfect triangular formation, interlocking fields of fire covering 120 degrees. No blind spot, no safe approach angle. Geometry itself was the enemy. George couldn't engage one without dying to the other 2. Period. So he waited. 2 hours of absolute motionless observation from a position submerged to his chin. Water cold despite tropical heat. Mosquitoes swarmed his exposed face. He didn't wave them away. Didn't move a single muscle. Patience wins wars more than courage ever could. Finally, biology broke discipline. One sniper descended to relieve himself unavoidable human need, trumping tactical perfection. The triangle collapsed. George fired instantly. The exposed man fell. The remaining 2 panicked, repositioned carelessly in response to the unexpected attack. George killed them both within 40 seconds, the Winchester's bolt working like a machine, ejecting brass and chambering rounds in perfect rhythm, developed through 10,000 competition repetitions. 7 kills. 4 remaining. But something had changed. The canopy sat empty. No movement, no shadows, nothing. George glassed trees methodically, scanned branches, anticipated elevation threats based on every tactical manual, every piece of doctrine. The jungle gave him silence, because the last 4 Japanese snipers weren't in trees anymore. They'd watched 7 of their comrades die, studied the pattern, analyzed how George hunted, and they'd adapted their entire approach. They'd abandoned the high ground completely, gone to ground level, inverted the battle space. Now they were crawling through ferns toward American lines, not hunting George anymore. Hunting past him, around him, bypassing the threat to slaughter unsuspecting soldiers behind defensive positions. George realized it too late. Spotted the first infiltrator 60 yards out, moving prone through undergrowth with agonizing patience. a second shape 70 yards back providing overwatch. They weren't coming for him. They were going for his regiment, and George had to make an impossible choice with seconds to decide. Could he stop 4 elite infiltrators before they reached American lines, or would try and get him killed and doom everyone? George expected trees. His entire tactical approach focused on canopy scanning. He glassed elevated positions, methodically scanned branches, systematically anticipated vertical threats based on established Japanese doctrine. The jungle gave him nothing. Absolute silence from above, then barely perceptible ground-level movement. 60 yards out through dense ferns, not vertical hunting from superior positions. Horizontal infiltration using terrain masks. The final 4 Japanese snipers had completely abandoned their traditional elevated perches. They crawled through ground-level ferns like jungle ghosts, exploiting terrain exactly the way George himself had, using natural depressions, fallen logs, thick undergrowth for concealment. They'd carefully studied his systematic elimination of their comrades, analyzed the pattern of kills, understood his tactical approach, inverted the entire operational equation. George spotted the first through a narrow gap in foliage. Prone. Arisaka rifle extended forward, moving with agonizing patience toward American lines positioned behind George's location. Not hunting George anymore. Actively bypassing him entirely. Their new mission, infiltrate past the lone hunter, reach the vulnerable American regiment, slaughter unsuspecting troops from behind defensive lines. A second shape materialized 70 yards back, providing overwatch. Classic infantry leapfrog tactics brilliantly adapted to sniper doctrine. Mutual support during movement, overlapping fields of fire, deadly smart tactical adaptation. George faced an impossible choice. Engage the lead, reveal his position to the partner, or let them pass, allow them to slaughter unsuspecting troops. He chose a third option, the forbidden option. The ground sloped into a shallow ravine bottom filled with muddy water. George assessed it. 3 feet deep, maybe 4. Visibility 0. Risk drowning. Alternative none. He wrapped the Winchester's action in oilcloth, tied his canteen to the rifle as a float, then submerged. Cold mud embraced him, swallowed him. He pushed deeper, horizontal, navigating by feel. Roots clawed his uniform, his chest burned for air. The Winchester threatened to overbalance him. He couldn't see, couldn't hear. Every instinct screamed to surface. He kept going, counted strokes, 10, 20, 30. His lungs pleaded, vision tunneled, keep moving. He surfaced silently behind the advancing snipers. Mud cascaded from his face. The Winchester emerged dripping. George settled into the muck, just eyes and rifle above water. Breathed, waited. The snipers continued crawling, oblivious. Backs to George, 40 yards ahead. He raised the Winchester. Would the bolt function? One way to find out. He aimed at the rear sniper, squeezed. The rifle cracked. The man collapsed. George worked the bolt, it cycled, mud and all. The lead sniper rolled, bringing his rifle around. George fired. Center mass. Down. 2 more shapes erupted from concealment, the final pair 15 yards apart, flanking positions he hadn't seen. They'd anticipated his counter-ambush. The hunted had laid their own trap. George submerged. Bullets chopped water where he'd been. He crawled through muck, rifle clutched to his chest. Surfaced behind a log. The snipers swept the area, voices urgent. They knew he was trapped, disoriented. They moved to close. George aimed through a narrow gap in the rotting log, 50 yards to the nearest target. The first Japanese sniper appeared, methodically checking potential firing positions. George controlled his breathing. Fired. Missed the bullet-clipped bark, 6 inches left, throwing splinters but causing no damage. The alert sniper dove left into cover. Work the bolt. Eject spent brass. Chamber fresh round. Breathe. The second sniper revealed himself attempting to flank George's position. George tracked the movement, led the moving target, compensated for speed and angle. Squeezed. The Winchester barked. The man dropped mid-stride, momentum carrying him forward into a tumbling fall. one remaining. The final Japanese sniper, suddenly alone and realizing all his partners were dead, broke tactical discipline completely. Ran. Full tactical retreat toward Japanese-controlled lines to the west. George rose from the muddy water, cascading filth from his uniform. Tracked the running figure methodically. 200 yards distance. 220. 240 as the man sprinted. Fired. The distant figure stumbled mid-stride. Fell forward. Didn't move again. 11 confirmed kills. Mission complete. George collapsed into the mud chest, heaving with complete exhaustion. The Winchester steamed in the tropical humidity barrel, almost too hot to touch. His hands shook uncontrollably from adrenaline crash. The toy civilian rifle, ridiculed, dismissed, mocked as inadequate for warfare, had just ended a tactical siege that battalion-strength conventional forces couldn't break with standard equipment and doctrine. The groves west of Point Cruz fell silent. For the first time in 4 brutal days, American troops could patrol without phantom death raining from the canopy. George had no time to savor victory. Gunfire had drawn attention. Japanese infantry, sick soldiers maybe more, converged on his position. Voices multiplied. Close. Too close. He was surrounded. The crater became a trap. Water to his chest. Mud walls hemming him in. Escape meant breaking cover. Staying meant encirclement. Footsteps splashed nearby. 30 yards. 20. George, submerged to his nose rifle underwater, held his breath. A soldier appeared at the rim, Type 99 at ready, scanning. The man's gaze passed over George, saw only mud, moved on. 2 more followed, boots squelching past within arm's reach. George waited. 5 seconds. 10. The soldiers moved beyond his position. Now or never, he surged from the water. The Winchester came up dripping. The nearest soldier 8 yards turned. George fired from instinct, point blank. The soldier fell backward. Shouts erupted. George worked the bolt underwater. The action cycled. He fired at the second soldier, cresting the rim. Hit. The man tumbled into the water. Bullets tore the crater's edge. George vaulted north, sprinting as rifle fire chased him. Vines whipped his face. He dove into another crater, rolled, came up firing. Third soldier, 50 yards, aiming. George's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him. The man dropped his rifle, clutching the wound. 2 rounds left, 4 hostile infantry remaining. Odds unacceptable. George sprinted east toward American lines, zigzagging as bullets snapped past. His lungs burned, legs screamed. The Winchester dragged at his arms. A soldier appeared directly ahead, emerging from bamboo. Point blank. No time to aim. George fired from the hip. Miss. The soldier brought his rifle up. George threw himself sideways, rolling behind a mahogany trunk as the Type 99 cracked. Bark exploded beside his head. 1 round left. George leaned around the tree, exposing just his shoulder and eye. The soldier advanced, reloading. George aimed. Breath. Stillness. The Winchester's final round. Squeezed. The soldier dropped. Empty. George ran. No ammunition. No options. Pure survival. Voices pursued 3 soldiers, coordinated closing. He crashed through undergrowth, no longer caring about noise. Speed over stealth. American lines materialized, sandbags, helmets, friendly troops. George burst into the perimeter at 11:13, collapsing against the nearest emplacement. Mud-caked, gasping. Winchester clutched in white-knuckled hands. Behind him, the Japanese infantry broke off pursuit. George had killed 11 elite snipers and 3 infantry in 4 days. The groves, a no-man's land that had devoured patrols and broken morale, fell silent. The 132nd could finally advance. George survived Point Cruz unscathed. The Winchester, despite submersion and mud, functioned perfectly. The mail-order scope held 0. The civilian rifle, mocked as inadequate, proved lethal in conditions military doctrine had dismissed it for. The groves fell silent. Patrols resumed without losses. Japanese forces, demoralized by systematic elimination of their sniper cadre, withdrew from the western sector. By February 1943, enemy troops evacuated Guadalcanal entirely. The 132nd pushed east without the phantom menace that had paralyzed them. George's superiors, grudgingly impressed, promoted him and authorized something unprecedented: a dedicated sniper section. George trained 32 marksmen into 16 two-man teams, shooter and spotter. He requisitioned Springfield 1903 rifles with inertial 8-power scopes, precision optics designed for competition, repurposed for war. The section deployed across Guadalcanal's remaining operations. 74 confirmed kills in 12 days. Japanese command structures disintegrated under precision fire that eliminated officers and machine gun crews from distances standard infantry couldn't touch. But Guadalcanal was only the beginning. In 1944, George volunteered for Merrill's Marauders, the 5th, a 7th Composite Unit ordered to trek 700 miles through northern Burma's jungle. 3,000 men. No supply lines, only what they could carry. George brought the Winchester. The Marauders pushed through brutal terrain, monsoon valleys, malarial swamps, vertical ridge lines. George's rifle proved invaluable. At 400 yards, he eliminated mortar teams. At 300 machine gun nests, precision fire that saved lives and enabled impossible advances. Then his body failed. Not from bullets, from disease, dysentery, typhus, malaria, the killers that ravaged the unit. A shoulder wound minor incidental provided evacuation justification. George left Burma mid-1944, gaunt and fever-racked, the Winchester functional himself barely so. The Marauders disbanded shortly after. Disease claimed more men than combat. Of 3,000 who entered Burma, fewer than 200 completed the mission intact. George's sniper section suffered catastrophic losses, not from enemy fire, from parasites rifles couldn't kill. George returned stateside, assigned to training. The Winchester went into storage. The war continued without him. He'd survived Guadalcanal, survived Burma, survived diseases that killed healthier men, but the cost, physical, psychological, would echo for decades. George's 4-day hunt accomplished something doctrine hadn't anticipated. It proved individual precision could outperform mass firepower in jungle warfare. The U.S. military took notice. By 1943, formal sniper programs expanded across the Pacific. George's two-man concept shooter and spotter with superior optics became doctrine. Springfield inertial rifles proliferated. Marine scout sniper units adopted similar tactics. The Army established dedicated marksmanship training, prioritizing fieldcraft and patience over volume. The lessons echoed into Korea and Vietnam. Precision marksmanship, dismissed as obsolete, re-emerged as essential. Carlos Hathcock in Vietnam employed tactics George pioneered: patient stalking, individual initiative rifles optimized for accuracy over rate of fire. The lineage traced directly to one man with a toy. Winchester clearing groves battalions couldn't. George's influence extended beyond tactics. After the war, he wrote Shots Fired in Anger, published in 1947. The book became foundational, a technical, unflinching analysis of WW2 small arms, Japanese weapons, and jungle combat. No propaganda, no heroics, just cold assessment of what worked. Historians, soldiers, and firearms enthusiasts studied it for decades. George demystified Japanese equipment without racial bias. He advocated for individual marksmanship in an era dominated by crew-served weapons. His voice, grounded, technical, honest, shaped how generations understood infantry combat. The Winchester itself became symbolic. George donated it to a museum after the war. It sits behind glass, now weathered wood, scratched metal, a modest scope. Visitors don't see 11 dead snipers. They don't see mud and terror and impossible calculations, but the rifle represents a pivot point. Before George, sniping remained niche, specialized, distrusted, occasional. After George, it became integrated, training formalized, equipment standardized. The military acknowledged that sometimes one patient marksman saves more lives than a company firing blind. That understanding, born in Guadalcanal's groves, influenced Cold War doctrine, Vietnam tactics, and modern counterinsurgency. Precision over volume. patience over aggression, individual skill integrated into combined arms. George's legacy wasn't just kills, it was proving forgotten crafts, marksmanship, fieldcraft initiative retained value in industrial warfare's machinery. John George died quietly in 1981, 4 decades removed from Point Cruise's contested groves. The Winchester Model 70 remained in its museum display case, rarely noticed. Shots fired in anger stayed in print through multiple editions read by fewer people each passing decade, its dense technical prose increasingly displaced by flashier narratives emphasizing drama over accuracy. The jungle groves where he hunted are silent, now completely reclaimed by relentless tropical vegetation. No historical markers commemorate where 14 Americans died and 11 Japanese snipers fell. Modern Guadalcanal hosts tourists seeking dramatic World War II relics, rusted Sherman tanks, downed aircraft fuselages, beach landing sites. Few visitors venture to the inland groves. The desperate battles fought there left no photogenic scars visible to cameras, just trees growing over forgotten graves. George's story whispers a truth that industrial warfare prefers to obscure individual skill, infinite patience, and improvised solutions sometimes matter more than perfect doctrine and unlimited material resources. One man with a ridiculed civilian rifle cleared tactical obstacles that company-strength forces with standard equipment couldn't overcome. Not through superhuman ability or Hollywood heroics, but through deeply understanding his tool and flatly refusing to accept that inadequate automatically meant useless. Yet history's vast machinery grinds such operational nuance into comfortable simplicity. George becomes merely the sniper who used a hunting rifle, a curiosity and anecdote, the genuine complexity. Tactical adaptation under impossible pressure, psychological endurance during solitary combat, the grinding existential terror of hunting and being hunted simultaneously fades into simplified legend. In war's quiet aftermath, true heroism hides in shadows never on parade banners. The ghosts who survive carry silence far heavier than medals ever weigh, reminding us that some victories cannot be celebrated, only quietly remembered, and that survival's cost often outlives the men who paid it. If you want to explore more untold stories of soldiers who changed history through one shot, one decision, one impossible moment at a time, dozens more wait in our documentary archive, each one proving that sometimes the smallest actions reshape entire campaigns.